Looks like we should be live. I don't know. It's our first time doing this, Danny. So I don't even know if we're live, actually. I just click go live and it says there's a green check mark. What's that?
Maybe we should have tested this.
Well, we did. We did a dry run of this yesterday. So yeah, I'm not even sure how to check to see who's here, but welcome to everybody that is. And this is the series premiere. So not just the season, the series premiere of, a new thing Danny and I were working on called the Bourbon Boardroom. And Danny, welcome. Big episode number 1. What do you think?
Wow, my first reality TV show.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a reality show, but yeah, we're going to have fun. And I think how this all started, Danny and I, we always catch up around this time every single night between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Usually a nice little debrief, hour-long call going through the day, going through everything we got going on, right?
Mm-hmm. At hour minimum. Sometimes it runs to 1 a.m., 2 a.m.
Depends. Definitely does. And sometimes we talk to some of our close suppliers at this time and internally and with our suppliers and partners, it's always been referred to as, well, we'll talk at the board meeting. We'll talk in the boardroom. And that refers to our late night conversations. And Danny and I just said, heck, why don't we just start streaming these conversations live? They're usually pretty fun. They're entertaining. It gives folks a little behind the scenes look at some of the things we're working on. And welcome, kind of an impromptu thing we're working on here. But we got an amazing guest tonight. We have a close friend of ours, partner, but also a friend. He's been a tremendous mentor to us in the business. And we're excited to have Robert Crandell here from Speyside. And we'll be bringing him in just a moment just to give folks a little background. Rob is just, he is, Danny? He's an encyclopedia when it comes to everything cast finish. And he's been instrumental in our rosé cast finish and our other wine business. But what do you think, Danny? Excited to get him on here?
Oh, absolutely. Rob knows everything. I mean, we have long conversations with Rob.
Oh, there he is. Without further ado, Robert, what's up, man?
Well, no pressure there after that intro, guys.
We're still trying to figure out all these kinks, how we even do this. It's actually a lot harder. We're usually in the passenger seat taking questions. It's a lot harder from this side, actually trying to drive this thing. So
from the command center, you've got no excuses now.
No excuses. We got to be able to do it. But my friend, good to see you again, buddy.
It's good to see you guys. You have your driveways all shoveled out?
Snow's coming tonight. We're expecting 6 inches of snow tonight. Winter storm advisory. But yeah, no, we should be snowblowers should be out and everything like that. But Rob, we got a lot to go through tonight because as we discussed when we first were doing this, we always said the boardroom. This is where we want to really talk about stuff that we're really working on. Rob, I'm going to give you credit. I think you kind of came up with the term boardroom because we would talk to you generally late at night about things we're working on. But we know for the folks out there, maybe give a quick intro on who you are and what you do and everything like that.
Well, for the last number of years, I've been the product development manager for Speyside Cooperage in Kentucky. The Cooperage for years has specialized in fresh dumped used bourbons, one of the industry leaders in that project. We have a master cooper from Scotland, which is where our company is based, and a team of 20. And so when we decided to expand into the specialty cast division, it made sense to use that warehouse and that team so that we have a master cooper on hand to work with barrels and do any recouping or tweaking that needs to be done. And it's centrally located for us as a distribution hub as well as relatively close to the coast. So it brings us the opportunity to set up our pipeline and work with small craft distilleries principally, but we also do a lot of work with some of the big boys. We do
like
some Penelope Bourbon, absolutely.
It's quite I was there one time. They took me on a tour, kind of actually I've been there a couple of times picking up barrels, but it's quite the facility. I mean, tractor trailers full of used barrels coming in, day in, day out. It's pretty crazy what they got going on over there.
Yeah, it's not unusual to see a truck or two at least a day on an average. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 trucks a day. It just kind of depends on what's coming. We process with the ability to process 1,100 barrels a day, basically bringing them in, inspecting and categorizing, recouping if necessary. The sorting process is really important. It starts out with the barrels to see if they're going to need to be cooped or just slightly tweaked. And when we say recouped, we do a lot of work in the field. I might actually fix a plug or fix a leak with a plug, something along those lines in the field. But the coopers actually, if there's a stave that's leaking, they break the barrel down, remove the stave, and replace it.
I mean, it goes down to that level of detail. And, Rob, you've been a tremendous partner of ours. Heck, I feel like we probably started having conversations about a year and a half ago. And, really, it really started with our interest in cask, wine cask finishes. And, Danny and I, we'd always joke around internally. It's like, man, heck, we could buy a bottle of Chardonnay that, was from a vineyard in New Zealand. And you could turn to Rob and be like, man, I think I'd love to try Penelope Bourbon aged in this New Zealand Chardonnay. And then 2 days later, Rob's like, I got the barrels for you. They're going to be on a container from New Zealand, but they'll be here in about 3 weeks. And, Rob, you've been an awesome partner of ours, but, for the folks out there, I think it'd be interesting because the wine cask finishes, I mean, it's an exploding segment of the whiskey category. And, what are some of the trends you're seeing out there and stuff like that?
Well, it's kind of fun, that we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and it's really the most innovative side of the business right now, because when you look at how you make whiskey, it's pretty carefully regulated. You can tweak your mash bills a little bit, and there's a little bit of tweaking on the front end depending on the water resourcing. So it's a little bit. The term we use in the wine business is be terroir driven. It's expressive of the agriculture or the water coming from that particular region. But when you get into cask finishing, that's when you can really, really start to just open things up by doing a sherry or a port or a double wood, adding different layers, different aromatics, different flavor components. So it's really, I think, probably the most creative side and by far the most aggressively growing segment of that industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Danny kind of was taking the helm from our side, and how we started working with you. I mean, heck, and we're still doing this right now. Is we would, and we're fortunate, right, Rob? I'm actually starting to learn this program. We got a couple people saying hi. We got Emily, nice, yeah, from the North Carolina Whiskey Hunters group. We love that group. We love North Carolina. Hi, Emily, and Isaac. You'll like this. We just got a comment from Isaac Ray. I enjoyed the rosé cask finish, and I hate rosé. So interesting, right? Nice, Isaac. But we love hearing that. So that's good to hear. We're going to dive into the rosé piece because we are working on batch 2 right now. But Rob, how this all started? We were sourcing 55-liter casks from you in the beginning. We had the PX, we had Oloroso, we had Cognac, and started digging into it. And why don't we go through some of these flavor profiles, because we got a lot of them here, and it'd be interesting.
Interestingly enough, I think some of them. Probably important to note, this whole thing started out with just some phone conversations. It started out with some emails, and it just got far more involved. So we started to pick up the phone and do these conference calls. And if I remember correctly, we did that for a couple of months. We got some 55-liter barrels in your hands, and we talked about flavor profiles that would develop. The 55-liter was kind of integral because it gave us a chance to kind of play around and experiment without having to commit to a full 53 gallons of whiskey. If you don't like the finished product and you've got 53 gallons, that's a bitter pill to swallow versus just 14 and a half gallons. But
yeah,
I think, we had the opportunity. I was on the East Coast working there for 2 or 3 weeks, and we had a chance to sit down over dinner and kind of got a better sense of what you were trying to do. And Danny and I kind of put our heads together. He was working with some chips that he'd been soaking in various different types of rosé, different grape varietals. And so we were able to pick that idea up and run with it. He had kind of already narrowed the field that he really liked the flavor profile coming from Grenache. And I've got a background in the SOM program and 20 years in the wine business, 25 years in the wine business. So we started talking about, well, where do some of the most world-renowned Grenaches come from? Spain, they call it Garnacha, great old vine there, and then we kind of settled back into the roots of it, and that's France, and then southern France, and then circled into the Côte d'Aron region, the home of the great Châteauneuf de Pape. And that's kind of how we evolved into working with this finish. And I think to your customer's point there, that it doesn't necessarily taste like rosé any more than if you're putting a little garlic in your pasta sauce, you don't want it to overpower. You want it to add an element of flavor and texture without being overpowering. And that was the other reason I think that rosé made sense, because it is a light, fresh style, high acid, very crisp on the palate, but it's not a big, intense flavor profile. So it really kind of works nicely with Penelope, which fits that profile. As we've said many times, Penelope is a kind of more almost of a delicate, nuanced style, something a little lighter, a little more contemporary, and kind of outside the norm.
And we finding finding those casks was like a game changer in that whole project. You know, like you said, we were playing around with chips and kind of soaking different wines in the chips. And, you know, we toyed about doing the whole project in chips at one point, but, you know, it never really sat right with us. We always wanted to find, you know, the French rosé barrels. And when you found them, I mean, it was just a game changer. It really drove that project home and made us want to go through with it.
And Rob, the other thing I want to mention too, so batch 1 of rosé, I mean, it was kind of a trial run. We were originally going to cancel it because it was right at the time of COVID. And, you know, we were looking at cash flow and everything like that. But, you know, one of the things interesting was because of COVID, there was a lot of delays in our supply chain, including getting the barrels from France. I remember that. Like I probably texted Rob 17,000 times. And where are the barrels? Where are the barrels every day? But, you know, the time between when the barrels were dumped and actually our bourbon was actually put back in them, rebarreled back in them, it was a pretty long time. I mean, so that duration was actually maybe 7 months, 6.5 months, something like that. And so what we're most excited about with batch 2 is, you know, we're way ahead of the curve, right? You know, we were just more proactive in how we went about it. And, you know, I think the timeline between when the rosé was dumped in France and the time we put bourbon in is going to be, you know, possibly down to 60 to 70 days, which I don't know, Rob. I mean, I'm assuming that's going to make the flavor, it's going to have a positive impact on the flavor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the key to cask finishing. We're not using these barrels for their tannic value or their phenolic impact anymore. What we're really looking for is the fact that they've become neutral over a number of years. The product that has been in it prior to that will have leached those aromatics and those flavors out of the wood, principally, probably 90% of it anyway, depending on how long that previous product has been in there. What you're really looking for now is the fact that that barrel has absorbed that parent product for a number of years, and it has a flavor profile that's developed in. So now as you take a high spirit or a high proof spirit and put it in those barrels, the alcohol is an excellent solvent. So it actually starts to penetrate the wood very efficiently and starts to remove those flavors. And it will obviously pull a little patina out of the wood, but mainly what we're looking for is the flavor of the rosé or the sherry or whatever the product that was prior to that. So the fresher dumped the barrels are, the better yield we're going to get. So yes, I have very high expectations here. And part of this was, you know, we're still running into COVID issues on the pipeline this year, but we started at the time of the year. Typically, if you're a rosé fan, you'll know that they start to get released early spring. So the producers are really dumping barrels right now to bottle to get ready for that. So we were right in front of the curve this time. In fact, we had inquiries out to the producers we got barrels from last year months before they were even dumping. And so you take the number of emails I got from Michael, and you can multiply that by 2. My vendor in France was getting lots of communication from me. And so, yeah, we're up to speed with a fresh new set of barrels, and it's pretty exciting.
We got a couple comments here. And Rob, I mean, the feedback has been very positive on the rosé. The feedback's been positive. And Madeline here, close friend of ours out in Nebraska. Danny, this was more your call. So the glass topper on the rosé, and she's excited to try batch 2. But the glass topper,
she likes it or she doesn't like it?
What's that?
She likes it or she doesn't like it?
Yeah, Matt, maybe I have to give us your temperature check. Yay or nay? And we'll maybe have to wait. There might be a little suspense, but we can kind of dig into it. I mean, if you look at rosé, it's what's the Vito Lock? Is that what's called? The Vito Lock?
Vino Lock, yeah.
Vito Lock. It's kind of common in rosé. It's a common yay. So she likes it. She's a fan. It's kind of just a nice touch, I think. And honestly, with the bottle style, the traditional cork and closure that we were using, it just didn't seem like it didn't go as well with kind of that, with the color style of it. So the key with the Vita Lock is you got to pop it with your thumb. It's a little bit different than say some of the other ones. So
sometimes you need two thumbs. If it's a struggle for you with one, grab the bottle with two hands and use both thumbs. But yes, the idea here was to kind of create a look and feel that was an homage to rosé. And a lot of the packaging for rosés these days has transitioned to that really contemporary, clean look. So, I'd say that Danny and Michael actually kind of hedging their bets. I suggested to do something totally radical, and that was to go to a complete rosé bottle, which would be a bowling pin shape, clear glass. Yeah. And the reason they use clear glass for rosé is because you want to see that beautiful, vibrant color. And I think I was just a little too radical for them in my thought process of putting bourbon in a wine bottle and how would that look on the shelf. But who knows, maybe someday.
You got wild thoughts.
Batch 4 will go bold. Maybe batch 4 we go bold on the glass. We try to play it a little bit easier on this one. But here's where we're at now. We're working on batch 2. I think we got about another 25 barrels somewhere over the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. Rob, those I think they left France, didn't they?
Yeah, they are inbound. Yes.
Nice.
And we're nice too. Our warehouse, we're right next to the Port of Newark. Get a text from Rob. We'll get a U-Haul and we'll go pick up the barrels ourselves at the Port of Newark.
And we actually have the whiskey barrels right now that we're going through, and we're trying to figure out which bourbon barrels are going to go into these casks and what that blend's going to be. I don't know if we're going to change it. We're going to see. We're going to see what we got over the next couple of weeks and decide what we're going to put in.
Yeah, that sounds like a grueling task, guys.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Where do we sign up for that project?
Well, so one of the things, and Rob, kind of like going through. So we've been doing a lot of R&D. Rosé, we kind of fast tracked. We knew right away it was something we were really big on. We wanted to do, just go full on with it. But a lot of these others, we've tested Oloroso, which is not super uncommon. I think a lot of folks are dabbling in that sherry cask finish. We've looked at PX. We've done a number of tests with PX. We've looked at VDN, which I know Danny and Rob are big on VDN. We'll explain what VDN is shortly. And I studied abroad in Spain, and I'm still a TBD on VDN. We got Calvados, which Rob is like, I think he invented Calvados because he's pushing it so hard. We've got Cognac, and we've got different levels of toast and char. So we got a lot of trials out there.
A lot of options.
A lot of options. And Danny and I am kind of itching to pull the trigger on something, right? Pull the trigger. I really, part of this call too, I was like, look, we've been talking about this for a while. We need to decide what we're doing for the second half of the year. We need to pretty much figure it out now. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be on this, but if we decided tonight, it would be good. So why don't we start tasting through some of these, Rob? Let's get your taste. We need your expertise on what are we tasting through? What kind of notes do we expect with the Oloroso, the PX, and some of the other ones? We don't have them all with us, but I know you know the profiles well. Does that sound okay?
So this just seems like the cruelest part of the evening that we're sitting here with glasses in front of us, and we're just going to say to everybody, whoa, this is great.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start with the Oloroso finish. One of the things that makes this unique for you guys, we talked about the freshness of the barrels.
Yeah.
Speyside's parent corporation is in Scotland, and they've had a relationship with our vendor in Spain for 30 years. He happens to be an expert in wood maturation. He's written a couple of books on the subject. So when we work with this gentleman, we know the source of the wood. We know when the barrels were made. He actually has a seasoning process where the barrels will sit for a year with a sacrificial sherry in it, and then he removes that sherry. Most sherry producers don't do that. They can't afford to dump out millions of liters of sherry. This gentleman happens to be one of the largest producers of sherry vinegar in country, so he can utilize that product. So then we go into a Solero system, which is a fractional aging system that was invented in Spain, where you're putting a certain amount of product in the top tier of a pyramid, and you'll take a certain amount out every year, maybe it's 20%, and you'll drain it into the tanks underneath and then refill it. So you'll wind up with an average age over a number of years. So typically the Oloroso sherry barrels that you're getting will have had sherry in them for 6 to 8 years. And Oloroso actually means fragrant in Spanish. So when you look at Oloroso sherry, it's very nuance driven. There's a lot of really subtle notes of sandalwood and spice, kind of toasted nuts and fruits. So it lends itself extremely well to whiskey. This was kind of an easier part for you guys because we had access to some 55-liter barrels to do some stuff early on. When it got to rosé, nobody puts rosé in a 55-liter barrel. So we kind of had to have things pretty dialed in and tweaked before going to that big format. We didn't have the opportunity to scale up incrementally.
Rosé was all about go big or go home, right?
Yeah,
there was
we were all
no
in.
55-liter rosé. We were like, we're either doing it or we're not. And Danny pioneered the most. We shouldn't be saying this on the air, but I love saying that on the air. Doesn't that just sound cool?
Yeah, it does.
Live stream, however you want to position it. But one of the ways that we did it, we're bootstrapping our business, so we're kind of, we don't have what you call a massive R&D budget. So we have to kind of do things very, systematically and carefully. And Danny, why don't you explain your initial process for even determining if rosé was even remotely in the realm of possible?
Yeah, I mean, well, Mike's wife actually had the idea of like, hey, why don't you try? Because we were toying around with all these sherry finishes, and she said, how about you do a rosé finish? And like, it was kind of interesting. Never seen it before, and we kind of wanted to be on that edge a little bit with the project, and literally just went to the liquor store and grabbed a couple bottles of rosé. Came home, started mixing it with the bourbon, and found that rosé does not go well with bourbon at all. So
some of them were disgusting.
They were disgusting, some of them. So it's kind of determined in kind of ironing out like why it wasn't working and if there was a possibility, maybe different types of rosés, and was doing research on rosé and the different grape varietals, and basically figured out that rosé is made in all different parts of the world. It's made from different grapes. So there's different types of rosé. Went back out to the liquor store. Actually went to like 4 liquor stores in January and bought, I think, 50 bottles of rosé from all different places, different grapes, all this stuff, and brought them home and just started mixing it with the bourbon. I think it was my wife and her mother were with me, and we spent the night tasting through 50 different rosés, mixing it with the bourbons. And I found that certain ones worked, certain ones didn't. It was usually the ones that weren't very acidic. And then just kind of narrowed it down to this Grenache grape, which is, notoriously, kind of sweeter, low acidity. And that seemed to work really well. Then just kind of went on to like running smaller projects with like wood chips and seeing how it worked with the oak and different kind of blends of our bourbon. And then fast forward, Rob found these beautiful barrels and got them over here, and we did it full scale, and it worked out. It was fingers crossed for a lot of that project, and it was nerve-wracking.
Well, it was kind of interesting too when we first started talking about rosés. Several things that Danny didn't know, so it was kind of hit and miss. That really the heritage of rosé, it was invented as a winemaking technique hundreds of years ago. This is before we had the ability to pump over in the fermentation tanks. The grapes would typically float on the top of the tank. In today's technology, you would pump the juice from the bottom of the tank over top of the grapes and extract more flavor from the skins and the fruit. Back in the day when that wasn't available, they used a process called saigner, which means to bleed. What the winemakers would do is they would blend the bottom, or they would drain the bottom third of the tank off, because that was where the lighter juice was. And they would, as opposed to throwing that out, they would make this light red style wine or white wine out of red grape. And that's where the heritage of rosé came from.
See,
So
every time we talk to you, Rob, we learn something new. It's unbelievable.
Rob, sometimes Rob's called when, Rob, and we can say this on the air. That's fine. Sometimes Rob will call like 1 PM, and I know it's going to be a long conversation. And I go, Rob, we just like and we're always like, I got like 2 minutes. That's how you always start every call. Rob calls me or I call Rob, and Rob's like, Mike, I got like a minute. I'm like, I got a minute. And we're like, table it for the boardroom. We'll talk at 8:00 at night, and we can like really vent through this. Cause a lot of this stuff, it's really, these are big decisions for at least our company. We have to, put down capital for barrels that, we may not even be able to turn into revenue for, potentially a year plus. So Rob, you've been the best, man. We really appreciate it, but I want to get back to what we got. So
these sherries, we've been toying around with sherries for what, over a year now?
Sherry. I think our problem with sherry is everybody does sherry.
And yeah, we don't know what to do right now.
And that's true. There's been a lot of work done with sherry, but again, kind of that edge that we're bringing to the equation is that these barrels are dumped when I order them. So they're fresh dumped, and our vendor sends them in with 1 quart to 2 quarts of sherry in the barrel. Now, sherry is a fortified product, 18% alcohol or approximately, that keeps the barrels fresh for a longer period of time. And when we're talking about cask finishing, I work the market. I cover most of the United States, and I see sherry barrels that are dry. Some vendors will call them sun seasoned, which means they've been baking in the sun and drying out before they're shipped. When you put whiskey in that, sometimes they won't even hold whiskey. They have to be soaked for a week or so before they swell back up so they can hold it. And so you're losing some of the flavor of the barrels when you rinse them. And this is a great situation because we've got a barrel that is fresh and tight. It's got great flavor components to it, and we extract really good aromatics very quickly and very great flavor profiles. So when we talk about the first one we had here tonight, this was the Oloroso finish.
Yep.
And, as we had said a couple of minutes ago, that you're getting some of the very classic layered nuances that are coming from Oloroso. You're getting kind of some dried fig and apricot sort of ripe fruit notes to it. You get some really interesting woody notes, some dried nuts, apricots, almonds, hazelnuts sort of feel. And then you kind of start to get into these exotic spices. There's a little sandalwood, maybe even a little cardamom, a little tea, all very subtle aspects to it. But that's the great thing about Oloroso. In color, it's a little lighter visually. When we look at Pedro Jimenez or PX, very, very different style sherry. It's actually a different grape even, comes from the same region. But the grapes are allowed to raisinate or air dry in the vineyards for a period of time. So what's left is super concentrated. When you evaporate 30 or 40% of the juice out, it's just like making stock or sauce at home. When you reduce veal stock down to make demi-glace, you're getting really lovely, silky, complex notes. And that's what PX does, but it's darker and it's sweeter. We don't quite have that same level of nuance that you get from Oloroso. They both give really interesting finishes, but they're quite different. And then Danny had this wonderful idea.
Rob, we had a couple comments here. So it's the Talking Dads. We do need to get into Ohio. We had a great time. They have an awesome podcast. You have to check it out. Our good friends, Bourbon Lens. We love those guys. They have an awesome podcast as well. Good to see you guys here. And I'm seeing a couple things here. So we got Dark Knight. So Shane, our good friend in North Carolina, Shane loves the PX. So we're going to get into the PX because we and I know Shane, you love the Dark Knight. We know the PX. I like it too. The PX is a little tricky, so we're going to dive into that one. I've been seeing Isaac and a couple folks want rosé at barrel strength. And I know we've tested this, so we'll talk about rosé at barrel strength because we have tested that. Keng's Kegs, Jamie, Mike, awesome customers of ours out of Lincoln, Nebraska. Thank you guys for being here. And Madeline keeps going, the rum. I'm hearing a lot of rum casts. So rum is popular. And rum's not anything we touched. We haven't touched any rum.
That is something that we talked about in our very first board meeting, if you will, over dinner. There's a few companies out there doing rum finishes, and I think there's some of them that do a really, really nice job. It's intriguing. We would need to kind of be careful, as you and I have talked about. There's different types of rum. Typically from Jamaica, they make a plantation-style rum, as it's referred to, and it's made from molasses, typically aged in American oak, and kind of more like PX. It's darker and concentrated, real perfumey. I would suggest we do something from one of the French-speaking islands or Barbados. In the French-speaking islands, they typically make rum from Vassou, which is cane spirit. So it's not a thick molasses base. And generally, since the French were tied into the cognac industry, a lot of those are aged in ex-cognac barrels. So you've got a rum that's a little more akin to cognac with French heritage, and to my mind, I think would lend itself very nicely to the more gentle style of the Penelope bourbon.
I mean, I'm open to trying it. I'm assuming these don't come in 55 liter, right?
They do not.
Isn't rum like the Wild West, though?
Because these are so expensive.
Well, good point, Danny. It kind of depends on where you're going with this. The Caribbean has been making rum for hundreds of years. When you go to the French-speaking islands, they actually, like Martinique, for example, they actually have an AOC, just like wine. It's very carefully regulated, and it's the only island that produces rum that is that heavily monitored. For example, they can only use 14 different strains of cane, which are indigenous to the island. They can only use new French oak casks of a 228 liter or 225 liter. So they can't use used bourbons. They can't use American oak. Can't use large formats. It's very, very carefully regulated. So when you get to those islands, there's not a lot of Wild West going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then the whole thing with the sherries has been like, and I think you were talking about this the other week, how I found that like we haven't had consistency between the small format stuff we've done in the sherries, so it makes us a little hesitant to go kind of go big and into a large format, barrel and kind of risk that good bourbon.
Yeah, it's probably important to note here too that when we scale up, sherry barrels are larger. They're 250 liter or 500 liter. So typically you're putting bourbon in a 200 liter. So you're committing to more than a full barrel for your experiment, and that's kind of tricky. Also, when you're scaling up, we get more consistency because you've got volume. When we're working with those 14-gallon vats, there's such an incredible surface area. You're getting really rapid extraction because your surface area of spirit to wood is very high. The larger the barrel we go, the less impact you get from the barrel. So that's why a lot of winemakers, when they're making delicate, nuanced white wines, will go all the way up to a 500-liter cask. So you're getting less surface area and a more gentle approach.
And I think if we do go big on this or go big format and do a legit batch size, that doing it in our own facility and being able to monitor every day will be important.
Yes, I would agree, because it can change very quickly.
Interesting.
So I'm still up in the air about the well, actually, I've always leaned more towards the Oloroso. I think, Mike, you lean towards the PX a little more.
Here's the deal. I loved the first wave of PX we did.
Yeah, it was delicious.
Our first wave of PX, I was like, what? That was unbelievable. And I think it was a 30-day finish. It was extraordinarily Danny, do you guys have it in front of you? Actually, the PX is down in my basement. Look at how dark that is. That was literally 30 days in a 55-liter test cask. The second one was just wild. It wasn't that it was bad. It just was different. It's almost like the sherry overpowered it. And maybe, Rob, this is your point, that you can't, it's hard to look at that on a barrel by barrel basis.
And the blend that went into that second.
Yeah.
Some of this is we're going to have some barrel variations on the smaller barrels, because the 55-liter barrels are not a traditional barrel. They're not going into the Solero system, so they won't have sherry in them for as long, and it's not as consistent. They're basically taking small batches like that, and they're seasoning the barrels for shorter periods of time to create that barrel for the market, where the larger barrels are actually the opposite. They're developed to create the finished product of sherry. So they're made for sherry production. The other ones, we're kind of adapting that barrel by putting sherry in it. That's the other reason why we're going to get more consistency when we batch up to a full barrel.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I got that.
You know, when you take a lot of times when I bring in new barrels from a new vendor, one of the things we'll do is we'll break them open and we'll cut the staves in half and take a look at the penetration into the wood. The staves are, 21 to 27 millimeters. And when you've got a 250 liter barrel that's had sherry in it for 6 or 8 years, you're going to see penetration into that wood all the way down to, 20 millimeters or more. Those smaller casks, they might only have penetration into them, a half a millimeter or 1 millimeter.
For those out there, this is about 20 millimeters.
Yeah, that's good. Well, so we've tested Oloroso. I think we've really where we're narrowing it down right now. We have a couple things in the queue. So we're looking at PX is definitely on the table, and we got Wes. He's a big fan of barrel strength, and I'd say with the exception of the rosé, we got to talk about rosé at barrel strength really quickly too. But no, we appreciate that, Wes. Thank you. And right now, the ones that we're looking at, like really seriously, is PX 100%. We're looking at Oloroso plus cognac. So what we did was a 90-day finish on Oloroso, and then we were just giving it almost like we call it, the three of us always refer to it as salt and pepper. We give it a 60-day finish in cognac. That's the salt and pepper to kind of round it out. And we would send these out. I think when we have a new fresh batch available, we were generally doing 2 to 3 test runs across the board. I think we're on our third Oloroso cognac. The feedback on that one was the most positive. I think I got, folks had different opinions on it. Not everyone loved it, but it was just different. That Oloroso plus cognac double cast finish was the most popular, I think, from some of the folks that we sent it out to.
Yeah, the cognac just added this like creaminess to it that was delicious. And then we were talking about maybe flipping it and doing the cognac first and then going into an Oloroso and what that would do to it. Again, more options. There's like never ending options in this whole thing.
That would be a really interesting experiment because, as we said a minute ago, Oloroso is only about 18% alcohol, where the cognac is going to be 80 to 90 proof. So when you put the cognac in first, you're going to extract more flavors very quickly. And then, maybe think of that as the backbone, if you will. And then the Oloroso would just be kind of the frosting on the cake. But yeah, you would get different extraction. It'd be interesting to try the two. What would really be cool would be to do a limited release where you've done a bottle both ways, and you could buy into that and take that home and do the tasting.
Rob's got all these ideas. He's got all these good ideas here. Yeah. I agree. I think it's interesting. But do you, Rob? I think we sent you the Oloroso cognac. I know you've had it before, but
yeah, I've got it right here. I think it's kind of brilliant. When you look at the marketplace, double wooding is a pretty common process. Generally, a double wood on a label means that that product has gone into 2 maturations with new oak. Mm-hmm. So a double wood is very different than a cask finish. In your case, what you've proposed here is not a double wood, but a double cask. And that's not done much in the industry. And I thought it was kind of brilliant. And it just kind of adds those, again, we're just talking about building flavors and nuance, one on top of the other, or in this case, many layers on top of each other.
Interesting.
This could be like the time we decided to blend 3 different mash bills, and we didn't know that it was going to be a big
logistical
nightmare. Yeah.
We got into this. We said, well, we get this one with this one and this one. And MGP's looking at us like, okay, that's not a bad idea. And next thing you know, we're still blending 3 different bourbon mash bills together. And it's a logistical lot of work for sure. But we get the flavor profile that we want and we're happy with it. And it's funny. So Isaac, there's a couple of folks, we don't have, I actually don't have the sample of the Oloroso cognac. So, Rob, is there a way, if for folks at home, is there a way for folks to, I know Danny did this with the rosé, but what's your kind of best way to test something like this, using a real cognac and Oloroso sherry? How do you normally pre-test this stuff?
What we do generally is to make what we call a model, and the model would be to take somewhere between 10 and 20% of the product, of the finishing product, and build it into the base product. So if you wanted to play mad scientist at home and take some bourbon or rye and then measure it out and start out 10% of that volume and add some sherry, like a good Oloroso sherry. And, it's important here to talk about the quality of the product. It's like anything else. Favorite term in the computer industry is garbage in, garbage out. If you buy cooking sherry off the shelf, that's a huge component of salt, and that stuff was never designed to drink. And if you're really going to do this and do it right, you want to have a good quality sherry that's going to be really silky on the palate and have some elegance to it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can get a decent bottle of Tio Pepe or, any of the major brands for, $18 to $30, depending on which categories we're talking about. So modeling it in, start between 10 and 20%, get it where you want it. And then you could do the same thing by adding a touch of cognac. And I'd say, maybe 1% or 2% by volume. Just kind of play with that a little bit and see what you like.
Absolutely. Well, I think
kind of a fun way to spend an evening with some friends and family as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, what do you think, Danny? You're liking it, right? You're liking that?
I mean, I really like I really love the Oloroso cognac. I still do. I would be most comfortable going forward with that. I think we could really make something special out of it.
Yep. No, I totally agree.
Rob, did you taste it?
I got it right here.
Oh, okay.
Kind of looks like a cognac too.
It's he said there's just another layer or two on top that's really quite lovely.
I agree.
It was a touch. The Oloroso was light. I don't know. With this batch, the touch of the Oloroso was very light. Even though it was in there for 3 months, it wasn't like pow. It was still like a light color, and it didn't turn it black. And it was just like the right amount of sweetness. It could have been a little more. We were talking about, but
yeah, and that's coming back to some of those barrel variances that we're seeing in the smaller barrels. Typically an Oloroso or a whiskey that's been cast finished for the same amount of time, an Oloroso versus a PX. The PX would, by and large, always be darker just because of the very nature of the PX.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's give it a sip. Because, Rob, what I wanted to pick your brain about too really was one of the other things that we've been working on. It's all kind of a whole nother side conversation, but really we really wanted to pick your brain. I mean, like these custom toasts and chars you're seeing them pop up everywhere. We have 4 different new American oak barrels with 2 different chars and 2 different toast levels. And it's something that we're working on quite a bit. So that's another thing that we got to dive into as well. Well,
as we've talked about, I come to this from the wine side, and I work for the parent company is called TFF Group, which is Tennelier Francois Ferrer, and they own 21 cooperages internationally. So we own a lot of cooperages that are focused on wine only. And the wine industry doesn't char barrels, they toast barrels. And it's a far more precise process. When you char a barrel, you're literally lighting it on fire for a controlled period of time. So you're penetrating the wood to a certain degree, but you're getting a really hot fire, which is mitigating a lot of the elements. When you toast a barrel, it's never ignited. It's a lower temperature and just subtle nuances. When you go from like a medium to a medium plus toast, you might be looking at toasting it at a certain temperature for 13 to 14 minutes, and a medium plus is 15 to 16 minutes. So there's very, very subtle aspects to it. So toasting is something that hasn't been done widely in the spirits industry. There are some of the bigger companies that have done it for years and not really talked about it, but it's now kind of spinning over from the wine side. The reality is that when you toast a barrel first and then char it, you're penetrating more deeply into the wood and you're releasing more vanillin. So you're going to get more of that soft, lovely vanilla, caramel, butterscotch sort of note. And depending on if it's a light, medium, or heavy toast, you can actually increase the vanillin output of that barrel somewhere between 40 and 60%. And generally, when we go to a toasting process, you would want to do the inverse with char. You want to do a lighter char and a heavier toast. If you do a heavy char on top of a heavy toast, you're going to kind of step a little bit on the nuance that you got from the toast. So yes, this is something that you're seeing. I was doing some research on the internet the other day. I saw 6 different products released in the last year or so that are talking about using a toasting formula of some sort. And that can be customized as well. You can do a medium plus plus or a heavy minus minus just by controlling time and temperature. You can get very subtle nuances out of the barrel.
Again, 50,000 options.
Q, right? We have 4 53-gallon tests. And I think going forward too, we got to figure out a way to get to have folks that are watching also it'd be nice to figure out a way to get folks sampling some of this stuff with us as we're doing this too, by the way. I think that would make it a lot more interactive, but we have 4 53-gallon New American Oak from Rob. We got them like 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We're getting ready to rebarrel them. It's going to be a quick turn, but I think we got 2 barrels that are 1 chars. One's a medium toast, right? If I'm not correct. One's a heavy. I forget the exact ones. I got to look at the notes, but we got
medium and heavy
tests.
So I think we did like a char 1 with a medium, or char 1 with a medium, and then maybe a char 2 with a heavy.
Yeah.
No, we did 1 of each. So we 1 and 2 chars, medium and heavy of each.
There you go.
They're going to be good, right?
Well, there's no wrong answer here. At the end of the day, you might even do what winemakers do. A lot of times, if you take, a winemaker say he's making 10 barrels of Cabernet Franc, you might take 5 of those barrels and do a medium toast, and the other 5 is a medium plus. And then at the end, he winds up blending them together anyway. But it doesn't always blend the same, and that can be because of vintage variances. You might get one vintage where you're getting more ripeness because it was a warmer climate or drier climate. So blending is very, very important in the wine business, and I think this is another variant that you can put into this, where we could take those different toasting and char barrels. Again, you might all put them back together at the end, but you just put them together a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're not going to take a 53-gallon or the big ones. We're not going to take a 53-gallon barrel of Panoply and say, we're not going to bottle this, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's too good a product. You're never going to have a bad result. It's just you might like something a little bit better.
I mean, I could show you a palette of product that we haven't released out of the warehouse.
Yeah.
That kind of sounds like a barrel club party to me.
Put it that way. But that usually had to do with like bottling lines going into the bottle filler that weren't quite.
We just want to be like both. We want to be happy about
sure
the end goal, end product, and
My point was there's not going to be a wrong answer here between these toasts. They're all going to give you something very, very unique, and you may want to do single barrels with them. You may want to actually combine them and do a double barrel.
Yeah.
And just so we're all on the same page. So we're looking at the char and toast more on our Private Select line. So we're seeing what that does on Private Select with the cast finishes. So with Oloroso, obviously Rosé falls into that mix. VDN Vino de Naranjo, PX, Calvados, Cognac. These are all falling into our limited release or kind of more limited. This is really just our cast finish series. Rob, I have my favorite real quick. What if you had to pick a cast finish for our profile? Which one would you recommend? Got a lot going on here.
There's none of these that are a bad answer. There's just certain nuances, and people are going to find favorites. It would probably make sense to talk for just a minute about the VDN, because I am quite certain that there is virtually nobody out there that knows what we're talking about when you say a VDN barrel. And if you do, raise your hand and we'll let you answer the question. We'll send you a free bottle of something, because kudos to you. Sorry, I made an executive decision. I shouldn't have said that. I'll send you something from my liquor cabinet. I had the opportunity to be in Spain for a couple of years ago, and I was down the second week visiting my sherry vendor in the Andalusia region around Jerez, that Sherry Triangle it's called. And there's a local product. It's indigenous to Andalusia. It's called Vino de Naranja. It's a young Oloroso sherry that's infused with local Sevilla oranges. And Sevilla oranges are kind of a bittersweet orange. So you wind up with something that's really interesting citrus notes. You've got the bright tartness from the sour oranges they're described. And when we were tasting these, I actually had the opportunity to barrel taste some of this stuff that went back 20, 25 years. And I'm looking at our partner there who's an expert in oak maturation. And like, why hasn't this been done? And you say, well, we talked about it with Scotch a number of times, but the Scotch industry considers that a flavoring by their definition. They're too rigidly controlled, so that wouldn't work there. But to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been done, or at least it hasn't been publicized that it's been done. So I believe, I could be wrong here, but to the best of my knowledge, we brought in the very first Vino de Naranja barrels from Spain into the United States, and we've been doing some small barrel trials and small projects with it. Actually have a couple of large projects it's developed into too. So you might start to see this on some larger labels. I'll just give you a little hint here. We did a project in Mexico with tequila that had stunning results. So I'm excited about it because it's new.
Nicely. Like that was such a great sale. And I love that term, stunning results. See, I got to incorporate that into my sales repertoire. But Rob, I do think you and Danny are big vino. I haven't really dived too deep into it other than one sample that you guys have given me. Do we have marks on the on any of the barrels coming in on the container now or no?
Our next container, you get some earmarked. And the other problem that we have here is that we can't really model this in a traditional way. Vino de Naranja really isn't imported in the United States. When I got back from Spain, I Googled and I found a retailer in Chicago that had some listed on his website. When I went to order it, it wasn't available. I've checked around on websites in New York too. So if you do find it here, it's fairly rare. The gentleman that I work with that makes it doesn't export to the US at all. So the only way that we have liquid to model from is when the barrels come in, we actually have been extracting some juice, some product out of the barrels. And that's part of that sensory tasting. We'll send out, some 2 or 3 ounce bottles, and then we can model with that. So that's as close as we can get. And in fact, when it's available, it's a more accurate modeling because we're actually taking the product that was aged in that barrel, not just buying a generic product off the shelf someplace that who knows how they made it.
I'm excited to keep trying or, take it to the next level, get a barrel and get a couple of barrels in and see what we can do with it. I think, depending on how we blend our mash bills like this, it could be delicious. I mean, just totally like creamy and with like a little like orange, kind of sweetness to it. I think it'd be great.
Well, the thing is, when you think about it, one of the classic craft cocktails is an old fashioned, and it's orange. It's essence of orange from the peel. Sometimes in the original recipe, they would actually muddle orange into it. And, orange is a classic flavor profile that works really well with grain products.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not everybody thinks of it that way, but it is a classic pairing. So if we can infuse that early on with the barrel and have that integrate throughout the maturation process, then I think, the sky's the limit on where you can go with it.
And
there's other people looking at it. I think, yeah, and I'm looking. Isaac's making some good comments, and isn't that the orange wine that they're making those wine-based packaged cocktails out of? I actually don't know. I thought some of the wine-based. Rob, do you know anything about any of these wine-based cocktails, like ready to go, ready to drink cocktails?
Generally, those are orange flavoring, or
powder
sometimes they'll get into an orange extract or peel. Depends on the base product. If it were a spirit base, then it could actually infuse farm oranges and extract the flavor. If it's a wine base, you're not going to really get that much infusion out of it. So I don't have a clear answer for you there on what they're doing. I strongly suspect that they're not using a Vino de Naranja because it's limited and it's not cost effective to go into bulk production like that.
Yeah.
And that's why we started saying VDN, by the way, because we all just got really tired of trying to say Vino de Naranja.
Took me like 3 weeks to even get that down.
Anyone, and we got to keep looking at it, and I think just from our side, I think I know you're VDN, Rob. I know Danny's VDN. I'm Oloroso Cognac. I think VDN might take a little while. I think I'd rather, if we're going to do a VDN, I think we look at VDN for the first half of 2022. Gives us time to test it.
I think we play with it in the fall and kind of show everybody what we could do with it, I mean, at the boardroom level, and then bring it out. Yeah.
Okay.
So also, I think it's important here for people to understand that when we're looking at these, we kind of have to look at sometimes a reverse engineering to the ordering process. We kind of look at a release date and then think about when the barrels need to come in and how long they need to finish. And with something like this, we really have no idea. There's no anecdotal information here because no one's really done this before. And even if they did, they don't have a bourbon like yours. So all these variables can't really just be done by math. It's you have to sit down and work through the process. So even if we were looking at a first quarter release of next year, I mean, that would probably be the earliest you could do it, because at this point, the next VDN barrels I'll have available will be coming in probably May or June. And we're looking at, 6 months probably from that point on.
And there's a few other whiskey companies looking at VDN, and that's good. I think we should all be looking at it. It's funny. I've had the test that I've gone with, and I guess I was struggling with the flavor profile. But when you just explained that, that's like, this is all real time. The way you explained it as it like related to an old fashioned, you're 100% right. Like the way that they tie an old, now you're not making an old fashioned, right? We're not making we're not making a cocktail drink, but the way that those flavor profiles play off each other is really interesting. And obviously this would be toned back quite a bit. If I'm under, that's an interesting way to look at it. I didn't think of it like that before.
I think you missed a board meeting.
I did. Well, I haven't been at all of them yet. This is why that's why you and Danny were so bullish on it. You guys are sitting there talking about old fashions together. So I haven't gotten there. So I think that's, I know we got marks on them. We're going to test them, and I got to figure out a way to get, some of the folks like Wes and Isaac, reach out to us, shoot us an email when we have samples. We like to have folks try this stuff. Like it's one of the best things that we do is they're all 2-ounce pours. But if you guys email us info@penelopebourbon.com, we'll get, if we do have them, we'll get them out just so we can get feedback. So
if you wanted to kind of try something like that at home, one of my favorite ways to enjoy a bourbon is just kind of on the rocks, and I'll put an orange twist, just the twist of the peel, not into the flesh and juice, but just the aromatics, that come from the citrus twist. You'll get the orange oils will just kind of pop out. You rim your glass and then twist that down inside the bourbon, and the bourbon will extract even more of that. That's kind of the basis of the old fashioned, is kind of, those orange citrus notes. And that would be a way to kind of, if you're curious about what we're talking about, that kind of takes you in that direction. If you wanted to get a little bit sweeter nuance to it, you could actually take a small wedge of orange and put a little squeeze of the fresh juice in there with the peel. And that kind of takes you in that direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, so real quick, this is actually, we got to figure this out because this is actually real. What are we, Danny, did you tell, what are we doing with this Oloroso cognac? Because it's 350 liter cask for the cognac, 255 liter for the Oloroso. Am I understanding that correctly?
250s.
What's that?
250 liter.
So 250 liter Oloroso, 350 for cognac.
Yep.
Now, everybody on the show wants to know, are we getting a discount on those barrels? Just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you, buddy. Okay, so do we know, have we given you the number that we need? Because we gotta get these inbound pretty quickly, I would imagine.
I actually have cognacs in stock right now, and I have Olorosos on the water that should be here. I would 20 days, somewhere in there. I said about 20 days out on the Oloroso. It's already on the water inbound.
So Oloroso now. What about cognac?
Cognac, I've got some in stock right now, 350 liters.
And we know we have to do at least 3 months in each of them. So that's 6 months there.
This might be the time that you reverse the process and start with the cognac first, because we already have them here. You can start that process, and then when the Olorosos come in, finish them that way.
I mean, realistically, we wouldn't be able to get them in the casks until the end of March at least. So March, April, May, June. So we're talking about like an October release, late September.
I'd be okay, Danny, going even further back into November. Like, I think it's better to stay away from when BTAC's released. Like, I don't know, like when you have all the big, you know, allocated bourbons getting released, I'm okay not being in, you know what, that's not our shtick. Like, that's theirs. Like, I'm okay if this thing comes out December 1st, right?
Okay.
And that's the thing, you know, again, this is experimental, so we're scaling up. We don't know. It's going to be one of these things where you can say, well, it could be October, or it could be December. It might not be till January.
Yeah, but we need to move fairly quickly. I mean, we don't have too much time, as like we could be thinking holiday season, but
Let's do. I mean, I'll take that as a green light. I think Mike just green lighted us.
I can get cognac barrels headed your way next week.
Nice. That's exciting. That's really exciting. I mean, we've been talking about these sherries for so long, so you know, I'm glad we're moving on it.
and we kind of knew we were leaning towards this one.
Yeah.
PX, I love, and I know Shane, I don't know if Shane's still on, but Shane loved, a lot of people love PX. We'll get to PX. We are going to do it. I think PX was a little tricky. It just threw me a curveball with all it just was a little volatile. Rob, I know you walked us through that, but I really like that Oloroso cognac. I think we can do it at a larger scale. And oh, Shane's here. Nice. I just think it's, to me, I think that's a really good one to start off with.
Nice. I'm excited.
So, well, we're coming up on an hour. I know we've been going for a while. So,
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Crandell, this was awesome. Always a pleasure having you in the boardroom, man. Now we're actually doing it live. Isn't it kind of different? We're normally doing this just over the phone, the three of us. So it's a little bit different doing this over on a live stream. This is usually exactly what our phone call conversations sound like. Literally, not even kidding. This is exactly what we talk about to figure out what we're doing. And Rob, you're the best, man. Thank you for everything.
You know, I would even suggest that as much as I like the Oloroso with the cognac finish, cognac, I think cognac would be interesting to explore with the PX too, because as we said, the PX is a little sweeter, and you would add just another nuance to that. It would kind of take that raisined, rounded, concentrated fruit and just kind of elevate it a little bit by throwing a little cognac at the end.
Oh, we're so
Why
close.
would you say that?
God,
One,
we were like,
one more option.
Now I'm going to want to try it. By the way, Madeline actually asked, and I meant to bring this up, can we get a rum cask from the Barbados?
Yeah, absolutely. I have 12 or 15 in my warehouse right now, and on my next container inbound, actually coming in probably like in April, I have different types of casks coming in. South America, Barbados, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and some from Spain. Actually, Spain does a pretty good job with rum as well. I attended the International Rum Conference last year, which was in Miami, and that was the first time it was done here in the United States. It had previously always been done in Spain.
huh.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
See the work I'm willing to do for you guys?
Yeah.
I had to go spend 4 days in Miami drinking rum.
Do the heavy lifting?
I did a lot of heavy lifting. As we say in the business, you know, there was no drinking going on. We were only tasting.
Of course.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. Well, we'll do it definitely. We got to get a rum cast inbound. I think we'll definitely take one of those. We'll start a trial of that. That'll be fit. That's 53 gallons, right?
Yes. No, actually, they're generally they're going to be 200 liters or 53 gallons. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, Let's start we'll start a rumcast finish. I think we've got some of the other stuff, but we'll put one inbound, right, and go from there. I can't believe you said the PX with the cognac. Now
I know.
Rob.
Come on, we were just
strategy.
No, that's just something we put in the pipeline.
2022.
Right on.
Oh, man.
We're coming up. We're up on an hour, and Rob, obviously we appreciate the partnership. We got Dave Honig, very close friend of mine from a very long time ago. We used to work together in tech. Big Penelope Bourbon fan. Awesome golfer too. Very good golfer. Good to see you, Honig. And but Rob, thank you for everything.
Happy to be here. We always have a good time in the boardroom.
And we might just make Rob a permanent guest on this show.
Yeah, right.
So then we'll have the three of us, and then we'll have someone else as a guest. Come on.
We need to mix that up a little bit. I'm not always going to be available to jump on the phone.
Well, thank you very much, man. And thank you guys for joining. We appreciate it. And hope everybody has a great night. Danny, anything you want to say?
No, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for people joining in on the first boardroom sesh, and can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, feel free to send in your thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, please. It's a great point, Rob. Send us your thoughts, like the rum and Madeline had said. We will literally explore the more creative, the better. That's what we want to try to go different and go creative. So the more different ideas we have, we'll take it. So thank you all. We appreciate it. All right. Take care, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
I think this is where you say meeting adjourned.